Hi everyone, thanks so much for watching this video. Today we are going to cover a very important and a serious topic, namely sexual trafficking of women and children and human persons in general. Why do I mention women and children in particular, you may ask? Because on the issue of trafficking for human persons, 90% of the victims are reported to be women and children, not just in India, but around the world. Why is this issue important to discuss? You may ask as a secondary or as a follow-up question. Now, if I mention the three biggest crimes, organized crimes around the world, what issues come to your mind? If you're thinking drugs, if you're thinking arms trade, perhaps you're right. Arms and drugs are two big organized crimes around the world. But the third biggest organized crime around the world pertains to trafficking of human persons. Now, one thing I want to make clear at the outset is that when we use the word trafficking, it is generally confused to mean prostitution. Now, prostitution is definitely one big part of trafficking, but trafficking is kind of a bigger crime, and most countries so far do not have kind of one holistic policy towards looking at trafficking. Why do I say that? Before we come to the trafficking law that we now have in India, let's look at the Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act 1956 in India. It refers to the word trafficking, and one would think that it covers trafficking of all kinds. Unfortunately, it really focused on prostitution and banning prostitution in India. You will also notice that in this video right away, unlike previous videos, I am making frequent references to countries which are around the world, or the issue as it is looked at around the world. And that is important because trafficking by its very nature is an issue that is not limited to one country. In India, most of the people who are trafficked are within states or interstate states. However, a lot of young girls from different states, notably from Jharkhand, from West Bengal, Assam, to name a few, end up in Gulf countries or Southeast Asian countries, or sometimes even in America and Europe. The reason why organized crimes in general and the crime of trafficking in particular are so difficult to regulate is because of their cross-boundary nature, so to say. The second biggest problem is that even when there are laws, for example, now in India we do have a law, the reason this is a crime that is so difficult to regulate is because in this particular crime, the challenge is not necessarily the law, although that is an important part of it. The major challenge is the enforcement of law. Given the corruption that exists amongst the police officials or the enforcement agencies, it becomes extremely difficult for the government or other stakeholders who are fighting against this issue to do anything about this issue in a concrete, substantive manner. Let me give out a few facts at the beginning of this video. In India today, one child in every 8 minutes is found missing. In India, there are around 1.2 million domestic workers for whom we do not have very strong or stringent set of laws, and many of them are victims of trafficking in one way or the other. Around the world, we are looking at around 2 crore 70 lakh people who have been victims of trafficking in one part of the world at one point of time in their lives or the other. Now, this is a $10 billion industry. We're talking about 10 Arab dollar industry. So there's a huge economic angle to the issue, which makes it further difficult for the stakeholders involved to regulate or to do something or to address this issue. But what are the problems in India specifically? One may ask, why is trafficking a problem? What contributes to this issue? There are several factors. I want to name just a few. Poverty is definitely the most important one. I mean, the story that's being sold to parents of young girls in villages is that your girl will have a very bright future in a city, and she's sold for $50 or less by a local agent in a small village. And then from that agent, she's sold for $700 to $800 or sometimes even less to a so-called employer. Now, in Delhi alone, there are 5,000 domestic workers as reported. I'm sure there are more. And many of these are young girls who are under the age of 18 years. They have reported, and there are several videos on YouTube, it's been documented about various atrocities, physical, sexual, and otherwise, that have been reported to be committed on these young women by their so-called employers. And of course, if they are sold across borders, then sometimes the prices are even more. But what do these women get out of it? Nothing really. Most of the times their passport is taken away from them, and they are forced to a life of slavery and servitude. Now, there are laws on bonded labor, there are laws on trafficking. However, let me bring your attention to the most important law that we have in India. Now, the Indian Penal Code, as you know, is kind of the main penal law in country that talks about different crimes. There were several provisions that referred to issues including trafficking, but there was no one provision that attacked trafficking directly. Now, in response to this, the Indian government in 2013 passed what we call the Criminal Law Amendment Act 2013 and replaced Section 370 of the Indian Penal Code with a new Section 370. Let me quickly draw your attention to what is the language of Section 370. Section 370 says, whoever for the purpose of exploitation recruits, transports, harbors, transfers, or receives a person. So these are the ends which are covered under Section 370. By what means? Let us have a look. By, and I go on to quote, first, using threats or using force or any other form of coercion, or by abduction, or by practicing fraud or deception of any kind, or by abuse of power, or sixthly, by inducement including the giving or receiving of payments of benefits, so on and so forth. Now, this is very important. Fraud of any kind, giving wrong information, luring the person, the parents or the girl in any form itself is also covered under Section 370, and this is for the first time. So the law in India as it exists is that we need to look at three things. We need to look at Indian Penal Code. There are several provisions that that the person can be booked under. Secondly, the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act. If the trafficking is for prostitution, then the provisions of this law also comes into picture. And third, specifically, Section 370 of the Indian Penal Code as amended by the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 2013, which squarely targets the problem of trafficking. A person could be imprisoned for any amount of time between 7 to 10 years. And in some cases, if a person is a repeated offender, or if the person who's committing the crime is in a position of a power, like a police officer, so on and so forth, there could be severe punishment that the person can be brought to or can be booked under. So this is in brief the law on trafficking in India. The problem, as I said, is less of the law and more of enforcement. There are several NGOs which are working in this direction, but the most important point which I want to convey through this video in particular is that there is a need in India to talk about this issue in particular. Rape is something that is oft discussed within India, in the Indian context, outside India, but knowing that sexual trafficking is the third biggest organized crime, and that several UN organizations have reported that India is a major harbor, it's a major place which not only receives women, the word they use is import and export women, which of course is a very dehuman, we can't import and export human beings, but that is the sad reality of it. So India sends its girls out, receives girls. The skewed gender ratio that we've been seeing in India means that many men in India don't get women in villages. There's commercial pornography, there is domestic violence, there are forced marriages, and there are bonded labors. So there are several crimes that result because of trafficking, and therefore it becomes an even more complex and compound crime that needs to be discussed and taken care of and ultimately be addressed in the society that we wish to design for ourselves. Therefore, there is no big message that I want to give through this video except this, that given the nature of the crime, given how serious it is, and given the fact that how many other crimes it gives rise to, it is important that we draw our attention to sexual trafficking and bring it to our daily discourse. If you like this video, please share it through Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, other social media. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it is useful. I'll meet you again next week with another video. Thank you so much.